give us more federal aid because of this economic crisis. He actually went on TV and said he wouldn't take any federal money for his state to help bail it out. You've got in the House young folks, Paul Ryan from Wisconsin, who has put forward what I think is a terrific blue plan for tackling the entitlement programs of Medicare and Social Security. Just a terrific young aggressive congressman. Mike Pence and Eric Cantor, the folks who just kicked out some of the House Republican leadership. Unfortunately, not at the top where it really, I think, needed to be changed over. But I do think there's on sort of the back benches of the Republican Party, these young, aggressive congressmen, the new generation. Frankly, I mean, the Republican Party cannot be the party of elderly, angry white men and survive. If you look at the one of the things that fascinates me is every year you see the religious right threatens to go home in an election. If you don't give us X, Y, and Z, our people will stay home. If you look at the turnout this year, despite all that, of folks who were self-identified in the religious right, evangelical, Protestant, 74% voted for John McCain. A slightly higher percentage, actually, than voted for George Bush in 2004. They didn't stay home. Where did the Republicans lose? They lost in the suburbs. They lost among people who are economically conservative and socially moderate. They lost among young people. They lost among college-educated white men. An amazing group to lose. People who earned over $200,000 a year, they lost. You can't be the party of angry, crotchety white men and win. You have to bring in young people, have to bring in people of color, you have to bring in women, you have to bring in a much wider base for the party, or it's going to die.
You have kind of touched on my question a little bit, but I have two questions. One is this baby boomer population that relates to your message very well. It's turning 65 at a rate of about 10,000 a day now, and versus a brand new motivated crop of voters that voted their first time this last election and probably understand more about the computer than I'll ever know, but have a hard time fixing a leaky drain in the sink. So you've got this huge gap of population, young versus this crotchety, angry white male you just talked about. And then you...
And I'm one.
Yeah. Well, then I'm probably not too far behind you either. But and then you have another issue that's of great concern of mine is the growing gap between urban and rural America.
Yeah.
And I'm a rancher, and one of my favorite sayings is you live in the city and I have what you want, you have what I need. And that gap just keeps growing, and you couple that with this demographics thing we have going on. How do you propose we address that from your perspective?
Well, in terms of the second part, I think Republicans need to re-embrace federalism. They got away from that. They got away to the idea that everything, because they had power in Washington, they got to the idea that everything was good and powerful and right came out of Washington. And I think that a lot of these social issues could be solved by turning them back to the states and letting rural areas have what the rural areas want. States that have Montana values can have Montana values, and California can have California values without either one trying to impose them on the other. But it became an issue in Washington of who could have the power to impose their values on the other side, and as long as that was the war that was going on, one side or the other was going to be scared off. And I think that the drift away from the whole idea of federalism, the Bush administration, again, was very much an idea that you centralized power. They took power from the states, moved it to Washington, took power from the legislative branch, moved it to the executive branch. I think it needs to go back the other way if you really want to solve a lot of these issues. Finally, I do think you've got a generational issue you've got to address. But I don't think it's hopeless. I mean, I really think if you look at young people, young people are demanding 47 different choices of the type of coffee they have in the morning. They're not going to be satisfied with a one-size-fits-all government-imposed health care plan. You know, and I think you can reach them and talk to them about choice. That's what they're all about. That's a whole generation that believes in choices. I think that you know, I don't think this is a generation that believes government works. I think they, you know, they believe government's not very competent. They don't want government in charge of their lives, but they didn't want George Bush in charge of their lives either. And I think that that's a lot of what this election was about.
Last night, Grover Norquist said that Democratic governors have fared pretty well with Republican legislatures in the various states because of fiscal restraint, you know, concern for matters fiscal. What in the heck happened to Dick Cheney after the Republican Revolution that put emphasis on physical restraint to lead him to say deficits don't matter? They simply don't matter.
Yeah, there became. I believe in supply-side economics. I mean, as a matter of simple economics. If you look at the Laffer curve, it's a very simple thing. You know, if you tax at 0, you're going to get no revenue. If you tax at 100%, you're also going to get no revenue because nobody's going to work. And there's a curve in between, and somewhere on the curve it depends on whether a tax increase is good or bad. If you push yourself too far down one side, you're actually going to end up with less revenue because you're going to just discourage incentives, and incentives matter. It didn't say, by the way, that every tax cut automatically pays for itself, which is sort of the caricature of what went on out there. But what became is this became a way to do government on the cheap. You didn't have to make the tough decisions. And in fact, Jude Winniski, who was one of the godfathers of supply-side economics, actually wrote a paper called The Two Santa Clauses, in which he said Democrats have always won by being Santa Claus. They've promised all these things. Republicans have lost because they've been the Grinch who's gone out and said you have to pay for it. Well, supply-side economics offers Republicans a chance to be Santa Claus, too. We can offer all the things in big government that the Democrats offer, and then we can offer tax cuts on top of it, because the tax cuts will provide more revenue so we can do all these things. And Jack Kemp was a big advocate of this. You don't ever have to get into the tough decisions about, is this a good government program or not, because we'll have all this money as long as we keep cutting taxes. And the public will love the tax cuts, too, so we can get a twofer. And I think that that became sort of a cheap way out for Republicans. They didn't have to actually ask the tough questions. Is this a good program or not? Should we be doing for it even if we've got the money? I mean, I believe you cut taxes, incentives matter. If you have good supply-side tax cuts, actually lower rates and things like that, you'll get more economic growth and you actually will get more revenue. But that doesn't mean you should spend more. And that became sort of the Republicans' way around this. Deficits don't matter because as long as we're cutting taxes, we're ahead of the game. The real question should be, is this program a good program, one that government should be doing? And is it something that's constitutional? Is it something that we should be voting for? And if it is, then find a way to pay for it. And if it's not, then don't do it no matter how much money you've got. I think that would be a good way. That's a good way we should all live. Government too. I thank you all very much. I'll be around. I can take some questions. One more.
Mr. Tanner, it's a great honor to hear you. My name is Kim Handy, and I came from Huson, Montana. You're invited to visit anytime. It's on the other side of Missoula. I would like to invite all of the fine minds in this room to also announce their names so that we might get to know some of the others. I hope I have Carl's blessing to ask that. My question follows up on the lady in the back. She said that Goldwater and Reagan are dead. And you mentioned Mark Sanford, whom I've had the pleasure of meeting because I lived in South Carolina. Paul Rye in the House from Wisconsin.
Paul Ryan, Mike Pence, yeah.
Mike Pence, yes. Could you tell us, please, sir, who do you read and where could we find that third contingency? Because I used to think David Brooks was my guru, and I've kind of fallen away.
Oh, you know, I mean, it's hard. The intellectual ferment, I'd have to say, until recently, has not been in favor of smaller government among the right. So, you know, the Weekly Standard, which has sort of become the intellectual journal for conservatism, has been a big government organ for some time. With David Brooks, Fred Barnes, Bill Kristol. I mean, these are folks I know and like, but they all tend to go down that road. I would say among people who are left with small government, George Will is still a small government person that I believe in very much. I would look to I mean, Cato's more explicitly libertarian, but you could find common ground with us on some issues, I am sure. I'm sure, you know, many of the folks in this room are people